Let's say last night was great. I wake up in the morning and suddenly I'm starting to feel aspects of significant anxiety because of things that are triggering. And the simple shift in that can be something as simple as the decrease in how much magnesium you've been taking on a daily basis.
This comes back to establishing healthy habits. Tracing it back to where we need to start is having healthy thoughts.
If we could all make our habits better and do it overnight, we would, and we'd all be incredibly successful, but it's difficult to do. So the first thing that I like, the science of what we understand for the gut-brain connection has changed. It used to be historically that people would say, well, if you're really stressed and you're suffering from depression, look at what you're creating in your body. But what they're really realizing is that the body itself, because of the way in which our gut specifically needs to be, that if that starts to become imbalanced, we start to generate a reduction in certain types of hormones, specifically neurotransmitters, for example, that then amplifies the effect of, or the creation of, anxiety and depression. Eating is without question the single largest thing that we can control well that's going to change who we are. Processed sugars, we need to reduce the heck out of those. The consumption of sugar is one of the greatest detriments to us from a physical health standpoint that exists. It's absolutely terrible.
Welcome to the Pretty Sister Podcast. I'm your host, Steuer. So happy to have you here today. This is a fun place of friendship, sisterhood, building confidence, hopefully bringing a lot of joy and good tips to you. So again, thanks for joining. Today, I have a special guest with me. This is actually my husband, Dr. Dave Steuer. Thanks for jumping on the podcast today.
My pleasure.
I've actually been wanting to do this for quite some time, and finally, this was the right moment to have a conversation. Dave is a doctor trained at Harvard, very smart, has a lot of great things we could chat about. But today, specifically, I thought we would talk about gut health and happiness and that gut-brain connection, because it comes up often. And of course, me being the queen of happiness is something I love to talk about, but also our nutrition and what we're eating and our health habits have a lot to do with our happiness. And so today we're going to talk about that. We're going to dive into how that combination works and exactly some tips and things that we can do so that we can be taking care of ourselves and our nutrition and our bodies and our minds in a way that will promote and support the happiness that we all want to create more of in our life. I know I am always in search of and ways to create more happiness. So Dave, Dr. Dave, darling, to get us started, tell us just the basis behind the gut-brain connection, because it's two completely different parts of our body. But I know one of his gifts actually is the way that you simplify complex medical things into a way that we can understand. So give us that simplification right now, if you can.
Well, first of all, the overarching premise is that the science of what we understand for the gut-brain connection has changed. They used to think that, for example, our stress or aspects of depression, for example, to use a big word that people don't like to use very much, but it's very real, it is kind of the inverse, meaning it used to be historically that people would say, well, if you're really stressed and you're suffering from depression, look at what you're creating in your body. And we have to treat those effects because of what you've done from this side of it. Well, what they're realizing now is that it's a little bit more the inverse. You still get some of that relationship where if you do suffer from chronic stress, for instance, anxiety or depression, you are going to have some effects in the body. But what they're really realizing is that the body itself, because of the way in which our gut specifically needs to be very homeostatic, it needs to be very in a state of equilibrium, that if that starts to become imbalanced, we start to generate a reduction in certain types of hormones, specifically neurotransmitters, for example, that then amplifies the effect of or the creation of anxiety and depression. So why did I start with that? Well, the reality is that science is changing and that things that we used to think were absolutely true. For example, if you said to your child, you seem to be quite depressed, we need to get you treated for depression, what you're really saying to them is that you're overlooking some of the way in which the body is very capable of handling that and treating it itself if we can amplify those systems. So I think it's really important that we jump right in, like we're talking about right now, and recognize the fact that the science is changing. The way in which we look at a disease state of any type, whether you call anxiety a disease or not, I tend to believe they are, because that's just the classification. But when you start to get into that state of where a person is struggling, rather than the historical way of saying, let's treat the symptoms, what we really want to be doing today is focusing on how do we stop the cause? What's really occurring in that person, in any of us? And it's going to happen to all of us at different times. In fact, the average human adult will go through periods of depressive cycles multiple times, even in a given day. So just because you cycle up and down doesn't mean that you're suffering from chronic aspects of depression, but you are going to go through depressive states. So rather than saying to that person, wow, your life must be so difficult and stressful, let's get you on medication, let's stop with that a little bit. And let's look at ways that we can change the overarching aspect of how that person is living, what they're choosing to eat, how are they choosing to sleep, how are they choosing to think, which is a huge premise of what you do, which is our thoughts can create changes in us systemically simply because of the way we think, and which is so true. So I love that about what you are constantly teaching.
Right. And in that pattern that I like to talk about is that our thoughts are creating our emotions, which then create our actions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the reality cycle that we live in, and beginning with our thoughts. So a couple of things that you brought up, it feels good to hear you say that it's cyclical,
Mm-hmm.
that we kind of, the natural tendency for all of us is to have these cycles or moments of depression or anxiety, because I think hearing that might make you feel like, okay, well, it normalizes our states,
Mm-hmm.
and can help you possibly have some hope, thinking, well, that's normal. Or maybe the things that get talked about, like, oh, it's a midlife crisis, or like there's certain categories of times of life and seasons that we go through that we're used to maybe some crash points. But hearing you say, well, it's kind of normal, this just happens, that's because of different cycles in our body, or at least the hormone
even
changes
just the
in our
chemistry,
body.
even just a simple chemical change, just to put that in perspective of what you're talking about, how easy that can happen. Yesterday, for example, I could wake up, have a really solid day where I feel like things are clicking the way I really think they should. I don't feel too overwhelmed. My level of anxiety is controlled. Everything seems to be going well. Nothing really happens last night. Let's say last night was great. I wake up in the morning and suddenly I'm starting to feel aspects of significant anxiety because of things that are triggering. And the simple shift in that can be something as simple as the decrease in how much magnesium you've been taking on a daily basis. So something that you wouldn't even think about. You wake up in the morning, you eat healthy, maybe you take some supplements, you do your normal thing, and suddenly you're having a really difficult day. And that day could literally be difficult because of nothing more specific than your volume of free floating zinc or magnesium, which is super important to the brain's production of positive neurochemistry, could have been deficient. And so rather than, again, looking at it and saying, oh my gosh, my life is so overwhelming, my life is so challenging, imagine if you made it a priority every single day to take certain supplementation to make sure that those moments that are going to happen, they're going to feel overwhelming, they're going to feel stressful, don't dictate your life. So for instance, just by increasing the magnesium that a person takes is going to decrease ups and down cycle because you're going to go through them. Let's do our best to decrease them.
So a thought that I was having as you said that is I remember when I had my little babies, I wish that they had some sort of a, thermometer or something to tell me if they were hungry, if they were like what the problem was. And of course they cry and that's a clue, but it's like, well, what do they need? This or that. And we don't know. And in that absence of not knowing, it can be hard and confusing. And I was just thinking, well, gosh, we don't know. We don't have any way to truly, there are more modern, watches and things that can be worn, even the blood glucose devices that can tell us information that's coming. There's a lot more than there used to be, but we also just don't know on a moment to moment basis. You can't just all of a sudden say, well, let me check my zinc levels and then supplement for that. So in the absence of having those types of systems visibly to tell us that our gas is low or whatnot, like you can with our car, I think we probably have to establish some healthy habits.
Habits and systems are critical.
Yes, to be able to support us so that we can be living at our optimal health to live our happiest life.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you teach and talk about this a lot. So let's do that. What are some of those habits or systems? You brought up supplementation, but what are a couple tips you could give us so that we can be giving our bodies exactly what they need to have the best chance for success and happiness?
So the first thing I like to do is I like to find people who have written about or taught about how to make changes in our life, and they've taught it well. So for instance, we talk about like habit stacking or atomic habits. You talk about these, different authors who have done so well at trying to teach us who trying to teach us how to modify or change what we do, because it's not easy. If we could all make our habits better and do it overnight, we would, and we'd all be incredibly successful, but it's difficult to do. So the first thing that I believe is important is doing something called habit stacking. And that is where you're already taking an existing habit, say brushing your teeth in the morning. And if you want to amplify your ability to, for instance, the effect of certain supplements, and that by the time you go down to the kitchen or wherever you're keeping your stuff that you're going to forget and you only take them every 3 or 4 days, you put them right by your toothbrush. And so that way, for instance, you grab your toothbrush and you grab that new supplement, whatever that is, and you take them together, or you do it at the same time. So you find ways to simply augment what you're already doing because you're good at it. And now all of a sudden you've simply just doubled your effectiveness at that same habit. So that's something that I think is important. The second thing that I think is critical is being realistic about what types of habits we are trying to increase. Like, what are we really trying to change? Because you don't want to go out there and say, holy cow, I want to make this list of all these great and wonderful things so I can be happier. And now all of a sudden you've got 46 different things that you're going to try and include in your day. It's overwhelming. It's a little too much to do. My suggestion is you find those things that are an absolute priority. There could be only 2 of them. Maybe there's 4 of them, but you don't need to do too much at first, but make those a priority. And I would make a suggestion, for example, think your minerals, for example, like your magnesiums, your zincs, your chromiums, those are really important. Don't feel like you need to go out and search for them independently. There are manufacturers of certain supplements that have done a really good job. They've bundled them together for us, and you can just take those all, and it'll have for instance, your zinc, your calcium, and your magnesium, and it's all going to be together. So that's great.
These are the micronutrients.
Which are so important. Let me give you another option, though, that I think is also critical, and that is that in the morning when you're going to be getting your day started, avoiding certain things and replacing it with something else is critical. So, for example, if you like to have breakfast in the morning, which everyone should have a little something to give the body in the morning. It doesn't have to be huge, but it should definitely be pretty, healthy fat focused with some protein. And some clean and some additional clean carbs. Like, you just want to be careful what you're eating. But the most important thing would actually be omega-3. Omega-3 is critical, and in the morning, because omega-3 is going to help the body reduce inflammation. So if you wake up in the morning and you feel kind of achy or sore and tired, omega-3 is going to help reduce that. Omega-3 is also critical because it helps to motivate the body to build certain neurotransmitters that make you feel happier. So you want to start your day happy. So you're taking your other micronutrients, like she said. So you've got your zincs, you got your magnesium, those are important. The next thing is your omega-3 supplement. That's critical. And I'm a big believer in taking a little more than what has been talked about in the past. They now recognize that it should be higher. So you're talking 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams per day of omega-3. Omega-3 is awesome, like I said, because of some of those other factors. But imagine being able to start your day knowing that you're going to increase your volume of testosterone so that you're going to feel like you have more energy, you have more capacity to get out and do difficult things, and you reduce how much inflammation or pain you feel. So omega-3 is critical.
So it's important that we get our micronutrients. And what else would you say, though, for those people who want to eat their nutrition? And there's a big debate about this going on. I mean, there's a lot of research between getting it in our natural diet versus needing supplementation.
Eating is without question the single largest thing that we can control well that's going to change who we are. We are literally nothing more than that which we put into our mouth. And it's as simple as that. If we choose to eat processed, pretty crummy foods routinely, we shouldn't expect to have a life free of pain or aspects of depression or overwhelming anxiety. I mean, those are going to go hand in hand, and that's just the way it is. And so what we want to do is look at what can we control. And if you feel like you want to be going out and doing a really great shopping list, you know that you're going to find all of your nutritional, your micronutrients, your prebiotics, your probiotics. You're going to find all of your healthy fats, your omega fatty acids. You know that you can find them in your foods. Good for you. That's awesome. The reality is that research has shown that less than 2% of the population actually does that. 2%. And so if you look at the volume of people that have it as a good intention, even still, they don't really get everything. So I'm a big believer in at least finding some supplements. I'm not saying forego looking and finding your healthy food and trying to eat your way to health.
So both are important.
Both are critical. And I think that's really important. And there doesn't have to be this concept that you're either a supplement, evangelist, or you're a healthy food evangelist. Like, you can be both. Which I think personally is the best way to do it. But just to get back, just as an example, if you reduce the amount of, for example, omega-3 that you're taking in a given day by just 50%, they have found that decreases the body's ability to do secondary effects, for example, such as helping with the intestinal lining. So if you suffer from things that dysbiosis causes, which is the faulty equilibrium of healthy bacteria, and that causes inflammation in the intestinal lining, and then you get that cellular separation, and you start to get the aspect where you're getting toxins and other things passing through your intestinal membrane, and you're getting that leaky gut syndrome. Things like omega-3 have been shown to be helpful in reducing those effects of leaky gut, but only in the right volumes. So the reason why, again, I say that trying to eat your way to health alone without the supplementation can be challenging. So you want to make sure that you are taking your 1,500 or 2,000 milligrams of omega-3 per day. That's really important. I had a discussion one time that's a little bit off the topic, but not much, with somebody, and they were really adamant about me telling them what is the best omega-3 period. And they had quit taking their omega-3 for about 3 months because they were so adamant about only finding the best omega-3. They didn't want to take anything that potentially wasn't correct.
Were they wanting to find it through like pure fish sources?
They wanted it through whether it was best fish sources, whether it was farmed, whether it was pure natural. They wanted to know what was the very best. I'm not going to get into that in this discussion specifically. But what was ironic is they actually had quit taking their omega-3 altogether because they were only willing to take it if it was the optimal thing. And my answer is, you don't need to be such a purist in your effort to find a solution to your problem in health and say, well, I'm only going to take this as if it's the very best known demand. That's great if you can find those and you can afford that. That's wonderful. But don't do it at the detriment of not at least trying and making a habit with things that may not be thought to be as pure. And so that was my next suggestion to everybody is, when you start to find that you really want to incorporate these as new habits in your life, you're going to start including magnesium in your diet. You're going to start using omega-3. You're going to pull out the sugar from your diet, processed sugar, and you're going to start increasing your fiber consumption. Well, your next best question would be, okay, that's great. Which source of fiber should I take? Who makes the best fiber? How much fiber should I be doing every day? How much omega-3 should I be doing every day? And well, who makes the best omega? So that's your next logical question. Well, don't get stuck on that. Do a little research. You will find that there are great suggestions out there from people like Huberman and others who are going to say, this is what we have found scientifically seems to be the best. Just go with it. Go with their recommendation. You're going to find that you'll have great success. And then lastly on that topic,
go ahead and say, because I'm sure people will be wondering, well, what is the ones that we use? And I think it's fine to say the products that
we use different. I use doTERRA's products. I think doTERRA's omega-3 is really well produced. I think it's an excellence. It's been sourced in a healthy way for both the environment as well as for us. So I like their omega-3. I think it's great. The last piece on this little topic of micronutrition and everything else is that you cannot replace poor habits with micronutrient supplementation and expect to have your ultimate outcome and results. That's like saying, for example, somebody who wakes up every day and they are grumpy, they think negatively, they look at the world through absolute black colored glasses, not the rose colored glasses or even anything sunny. It's just always negative. And then they walk out the front door and they wonder why positive things aren't happening to them. And
they should wear the rose colored glasses.
You need to change your glasses. You need to make the difficult choices in life too, which is that what are the things that I'm doing that I can change? So for example, sugar, processed sugars, we need to reduce the heck out of those. The consumption of sugar is one of the greatest detriments to us from a physical health standpoint that exists. It's absolutely terrible. And we need to do our best to reduce that. So that's just one example. But you tie that in some of the research articles to our thoughts. How do we think? How do we behave verbally and then based on just our thinking alone is as toxic, if not more, than things like, for instance, processed sugar. We can see all these research articles that talk about our nutrition and whatever, and yet to believe that we can think negatively or act negatively or have depressing constant self-critique and talk all the time is not going to have a physical outcome. That's complete crap. The reality is we have to make sure that we make those changes too. And that's something that you are so good at.
It's like, I mean, when you put it that way, thinking negatively about ourselves would be like eating that candy bar for your body,
constantly.
And I think we as women are more prone to jump on diets and especially this time of year, as summer's coming and you're thinking, oh, I got to get in shape and I'll try this diet or that diet and make food adjustments. But are you also willing, or have you thought of that comparison of how important it is to change your thinking too? And some of that thought process can have just as big of an impact or a similar impact as changing what we're eating and what we're doing physically to our body. So it's not an either or, as you mentioned, it's a both and. We want to be taking a look at our thoughts, but also taking a look at our habits and our consumption as well. So, just to cover, so to be more well-rounded, it's not just what we're putting into our mouth and what we're eating. There's some other really great habits that we need to do for our health for optimal happiness. I know one of them is sleep.
Sleep's
So tell us
so
a little
critical.
bit
That's a
about.
whole other topic, but we can go. We don't talk
Should
about
we
sleep.
not go to sleep?
No, go
or
for it.
exercise, or
Sleep is just as powerfully relevant as what we put into our mind and into our mouth. Sleep is so critical. It is really the backbone of what derives a healthy long-term physical outcome to us. And so there are people that believe, I used to do this. In fact, I used to be proud of the fact that I could sleep 2 or 3 hours in a given night and say, okay, I'm good to go. I only slept 3 hours. I can get back to work and I can go back to studying. That's hogwash in the sense that if you believe you're still going to be healthy afterwards, it doesn't work that way. Your body will crash at some point, and it doesn't work. Clearly, there's times where you have to, like as a mom, you're just wiped out and you're trying to take care of your kids and you can only sleep a little bit and then your next baby's crying. And I mean, those things are going to happen, but sleep, we need to make a priority.
And I think that's interesting because I used to, like you, or at least I know I've heard of it often, people thinking that it's a badge of honor, how little sleep I got and still able to do X, Y, Z. And even in the medical professions, just the hours that were worked and used to be unregulated during residencies of putting in so many hours. Again, it was like this training ground of hazing almost. And now that's been regulated a little bit more because
a little bit
is so important. I know it's still not perfect, but we need to change the way we're thinking about that. And we need to protect our sleep and have that be the badge of honor, is how much sleep that we did get, because it shows that we're taking care of and we're loving and appreciating our body so much that we're giving it the rest and the sleep that it needs, because it is so valuable and important to us.
Yeah. What's weird about sleep is sleep comes with its own gate. It's called a gated effect. And so sleep itself is optimal only within a certain window. If you have too little sleep, and they use something called C-reactive protein as a marker for this. So that's one of the ways that they can do blood work and determine how inflamed are you chronically. So they look at this protein called C-reactive protein. And if you're on the short end, if you're only sleeping 3 or 4 hours a day, they have found that you have multiples of rate of an increase in potential heart attack. It's like 2 or 3x more than someone who is sleeping more. So if you're down here at like 3, 4, 5 hours a night on sleep, your incidence rate of having a heart attack is higher, much higher. Your level of chronic inflammatory markers, so your level of inflammation in the body, which leads to an increase in weight gain, a decrease in vision, problems with tremors, it causes an increase in blood pressure and all these other things that can happen, specifically heart attacks. That's on the low end. Well, here's the irony, is that you would think then, well, fine, I'll just sleep a whole bunch. I'll just average like a teenage boy who's sleeping, until noon when they can on any given day. It's like, holy moly, how many hours have you slept? That gate on the other end does the same thing. So we need to be in between. So if you're sleeping more than 9 hours a day, then that C-reactive protein is also elevated. And your incidence rate of a heart attack is also elevated. So what they're finding is that you want to be in this sweet spot, and it's anywhere from around 7 to 9 hours of sleep in a given day. So that is it. Certain people have learned how to do, and this is the exception. Certain people have learned how to take those 9 hours, they spread it out over the entire day. They sleep for 2 or 3 hours at a time. They get back up, they sleep 2 or 3 hours. That's very uncommon, because what you're trying to do is give your body very deep sleep moments, your REM sleep, all those other different pieces of your sleep profile are very important. And that usually only happens when you give it a long berth or a long window to accomplish it. So that's how come those 7 to 9 hours are so important.
Mm-hmm. And this is not new news in the sense that we need to do this frequently, habitually.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we can't, eat wonderful one day and then or eat a lot one day and then not need to eat the next day. And we have to eat every day. We need to sleep every day. We need to exercise every day. This comes back to establishing healthy habits, which comes from, I believe, tracing it back to where we need to start is having healthy thoughts. Because if you're feeling like, well, I don't even know where to start, I'm not doing this right or that right, or if you're beating yourself up over it, you're not going to get up and do it. So what can we say to just give our listeners a couple of tips and ideas of how to get started if they're feeling possibly in any one of these ways that they're out of whack on their eating or their sleeping or the exercising, or if you're feeling, typically that means that you could be in a state of depression or anxiety to start. Any of those emotional side effects that we feel when these things are out of whack, it's going to manifest in one of those ways, right? So if you're having that issue, what's the first place to go to get started to make and affect some changes? What would you recommend?
So I'm going to summarize another one of the things you talked about in a way to try and answer this as well. An interesting thing they found in a study was how critical women are about themselves as compared to men about themselves. So I know this, you may think I'm not answering your question, but I am, I promise you.
I think this is great.
So one of the things that's interesting is that women will, if you take, in the studies, they found that if a woman looks in the mirror and looks at herself, she's going to find a series of negative events or negative aspects of her before she finds one thing positive. And the ratio is about 3-to-1 women to men. So women are far more critical of aspects of who they are, whether it's they look in the mirror and say, I don't like my hair or my eyelashes, or I don't like the way my body looks in this, or I'm not comfortable with my lips. They literally will find physical flaws at a ratio of 3-to-4-to-1 that men do. And men are not any better. Trust me, this isn't in the sense that men don't physically have less flaws. It's just that men, for whatever reason, and they're linking this all the way back to early childhood and parenting that has come down through normally the maternal aspect of parenting, but they're finding the young women, and especially today, and this is where I'm going to bring this in, is that the social media space hurts young women much faster than it hurts young men at a much younger age. And so the criticisms that a young woman finds or feels while looking on social media, for example, are much harsher at a much younger age. So one of the tips that I would recommend is that if you're trying to make changes and you're trying to find ways to implement a change in your life, whether it's about weight or sleep or your anxiety, one of my first suggestions is look at what you do in your social media presence. What do you do that is actually going to be uplifting in it versus how much of that is critical and self-harming? And the reality is, if you're spending hours a day, not even realizing you're spending hours a day on all these different social media platforms, a large majority of that is critical, hurtful, and harmful, especially to young women. It is to young men too, but the studies are showing that it's even more so harmful to young women, and that needs to change. And so in order to say to somebody, what can we do to have better sleep or better habits? Sometimes those are harder to change. Though something that is controllable, though, is their way that they look at themselves through social media. What am I doing with those minutes every single day that I could be using them in some other way?
We are on social media a lot, and kids are, and everybody is. And this is so important to me, which is why I'm talking about this a lot. Just this need for women to think differently. And I think bringing awareness to it, like you've just done, is really important so that we are understanding, well, first, normalizing that the problems that we're all facing together in this culture and these changes that are happening, and realizing, okay, I think that's really interesting to know that science is showing now that women are more critical than men in the way that we're looking at
specifically of themselves too, which is so difficult.
And so knowing that, we got to get smart about being intentional in the way that we're viewing and thinking, interpreting that information coming back to us. And I said it before, and I'll say it again, we just don't want to get caught in this comparison as we're seeing things. If we can switch the way we're interpreting what's coming at us and look at it more in a way of me too, like, look what's out there and I could have that, or I could do that, or this is what's possible, and let it inspire us instead of feeling less than. And that's, I think, the problem. It's not just that we're seeing it, it's that we're seeing it and feeling we're comparing ourselves to it and then coming up short, versus learning to celebrate what other people are doing, learning to be excited for what other women are accomplishing, learning to have it inspire you and help you see this is something I could create or something I could have more of, and look what they're doing and I'd love to do that too. And maybe there's a dose of realism that we have to have, because maybe, we can't actually go to Greece and live on that island, or some of the things that we're seeing out there, but we can still learn to not measure ourselves against it and accept the state of where we are in our own lives, and then still be happy for others. And I think that that's just takes practice, like all things. We're fine with, one of our sons just decided yesterday actually to run a marathon, and he just signed up for the marathon in October. So he's got a nice runway of time to train for it. And even got up, and in our family group chat, he's texting this morning that he got up and he did his run, and he's so excited he's like, I'm stacking my wins. He's going to practice and he's going to get there step by step. And he's okay with knowing that he can't run that marathon right now, but he's going to put the work in to do it, that habit creation and the steps to get to that finish line. And I think we sometimes, like, we understand that in exercise, we understand that in, losing weight, even though it's hard to do. But I don't know that we sometimes give ourselves that same grace and understanding when we're talking about mental shifts and mental habits that we need to make, as far as creating awareness and just getting a little bit better every day at our self-talk, or the way that we are learning how to not compare or not to criticize, and to have more self-acceptance. And I think that we can be gracious as we put those things into practice.
And that what I really would hope, at least from a medical standpoint, would be that people in the areas that they can control take responsibility for those things and do start to make tiny changes, tiny shifts. So, for example, it would be almost impossible as a parent to go to your 13-year-old daughter and say, well, we've decided as parents that we're going to completely cut out all of your social media. You get no access to a phone, no social media, nothing. That's going to go over like a ginormous lead balloon. Things are going to explode. Bad things are going to happen all around you. Probably not the ideal approach in every family. So maybe that works for somebody, but it's probably not ideal for everyone. I think that as long as there is at least communication with her, where you help her to understand that you can see things that she might not be seeing, that you understand that there's stresses that she's going through that she probably doesn't even recognize are that challenging, because you haven't ever expressed them before and you never went through it. My number one suggestion, at least from a medical standpoint, is how do we help prevent some of these incident rates of childhood depression, which are going through the roof now? What can we do? And so that's where you had said, like, what are some of the tips or things that we can be doing? So number one would be working with our youth, or ourselves if necessary, to be very honest about our social media platform experience. What are we experiencing? How much time are we spending on it? How much is that influencing us and our positive self-talk and our behaviors? Because my guess is it's influencing a lot more than we think. The second would then be to remove some of the things within our home that we know are synthetically going to be causing problems in the hormone production of our children. Or sugar, huge. Sugar would, just as an example, would be wonderful to remove in all of its forms, which means you're going to do a lot of replacing. You're going to go in throughout the house and have to get rid of quite a few things. That's okay. We replace it with other alternatives, which are going to be healthier.
Can we talk about moderation? I, for one, do enjoy a treat here and there.
Yeah. I agree.
So I think there can be some balance with that, right? We
Yeah.
don't have to go overboard and say you never can have,
And
or
that
we're
doesn't
never
work
going to do,
either.
because those, yeah, I
That's another
found,
lead balloon.
yes, those things when you say an absolute hard no, it's not always realistic.
Mm.
And then it can create a lot more desire, honestly, or rebellion
But
within
if we can at
ourselves.
least create an environment where we're saying, okay, we are going to try and make this a healthier environment for our home, what do we do? So, step one, we have those honest and real conversations with each other, with our children about social media platforms, what's happening in that space. The second would be to make our cooking environment, the things we're shopping for, the things we're putting in our pantries, the things we're ultimately going to be putting in our mouth, let's make them healthier. The third would then be to set up some type of family routine where we know that bedtime is sacred. And how do we do that? It's so hard on it for every single family to incorporate sacred sleep time, but it needs to exist. And so that means that we may need to have our family's approach will be different than someone else's. Someone may say that at 9 o'clock all electronics go off. There's no blue screen or no blue light past 9:30. There's no, you know what I mean? Like they may have these rules that may work for their family, would never work for somebody else. But as long as we try and make sacred sleep time a thing, then I think then sleeping would then be really will then be received, and at least we're trying to teach good habits.
And at least we're trying to then prioritize our own health, our own happiness, which is where we began this conversation, is how we can, well, we've kind of gone all over the place, which I love. There's so many great topics. We can even have a conversation another time and touch on some more of them more deeply. But beginning with that gut brain connection and learning about how we can be proactive in our happiness more in so many different ways, which we've discussed. I think that this has been very valuable in giving us some tips for that. Is there anything else that we want to include before we wrap this up? Any other things that you're just dying to tell us right now?
There's so much.
I know we've been all over the place, but what?
There's so much information on this. I would say that the one thing that would be very helpful is that if each person were to spend just a few minutes and do some quick research on your own on areas that you find enticing or things that are exciting to you about the topic of this, because there's so much. You can have things called vagus nerve stimulation. You can have, oh my goodness, I can get into so many different topics. My suggestion would be that to recognize that this is critical. Our gut-brain connection is a real thing. We're recognizing that it's no longer the inverse of the problems. We are literally, because of the way we treat our gut, how we maintain equilibrium does in fact create levels of anxiety and depression. So it's not the other way around. So we really do need to make sure that our gut-brain connection is a healthy one, that our gut itself is healthy. And my last thing would be, after we've now worked really hard on sleep, tried to make our health and our environments very, very restful, my last would be to incorporate a probiotic into your life. Probiotics are absolutely critical. And whether you're choosing to take them at night, take them in the morning, don't get caught up in the details. I'm a big believer in the morning, but that's just me. Taking probiotics is absolutely essential. It's going to help to regulate that gut-brain connection, and it's going to help to make a person inherently happier, more energetic, more fun to be around. They're going to want to do the things that you want to be doing, then rather than sitting on the couch and moping and kind of grumpy. Get a probiotic in every person in your household's life. Have them making that a routine. Probiotics are extremely important.
I love it. I take my probiotic in the morning.
Yeah, it's really, probiotics are important.
I'm going to give myself an A+ check for that one.
Yeah, probiotics are super important.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time in doing this and coming on and talking about these things. I'm all about happiness and creating more happiness. So hopefully that there should be something in here that you can think about and incorporate. Because again, we did cover a lot of different topics just very briefly. But I will ask you, Pretty Sisters and listeners, to maybe leave a review or some comments, because it would be great to get some feedback on what questions you might have after this discussion that would help us to know what you would like to hear more of. Because since I am married to this guy, I can definitely bring you on, twist his arm, and get him to teach us a little bit more.
That'll be my pleasure.
About topics that are of most interest to you. So again, thank you, Dave, for joining us, and thank you, Pretty Sisters, for tuning in today for the Pretty Sister Podcast. I am so happy to spend this time with you each week, and glad that you're here. And again, please do share this with somebody who you thought of that might benefit from this information. And most of all, stay pretty. We'll see you next week.